Welcome to the Stiles Council podcast about the England national football team. I'm Chris Nee and I'm joined by David Hartrick to very quickly talk about England 0, Belgium 1 at World Cup Russia 2018. Quickly for a reason, Dave.
Yeah, it's difficult to sort of chat about the game really because I don't know your opinion, Chris, but quite simply it really lives or dies by the result you get in the next game, doesn't it? It's a weird one.
Yeah, and possibly not even in the next game, really. I think if there's any credence to the idea that England were maybe not deliberate, but willing to have a look at the so-called softer side of the draw, then they've actually placed a pretty significant hurdle in front of themselves from the very beginning of that. So if England were to find themselves in a semi-final, then the approach to this game takes on a more positive sheen. As it happens, I don't think it was a positive experience for England. I have my issues with the way that it was approached, but I'm really not willing to draw any conclusions from it whatsoever in isolation.
It's a funny one, isn't it? Because we can sit here and both say we think he made too many changes. We think it's upset the rhythm. It was. It is really difficult to talk about because if you go and beat Colombia and you put a performance in, then you have to say, well, potentially that's a masterstroke. If we go up against Colombia and, I mean, even if we beat them, but it's a really dodgy performance, you know, it's a really stodgy Euro 96 against Spain job, then it doesn't feel you've still lost some of that feeling, some of that momentum. So I don't know, but I mean we should talk about the game, really, shouldn't we?
Yeah, we should. Lost momentum possibly, but I don't think a win over Colombia is a win, and that's pretty much how I'm seeing the rest of this competition. It's why I didn't really have much truck with the idea of coming second on purpose, is because once you get past this stage, you're just in a World Cup knockout stage, along with every team that you're going to be playing against in that. So you take each game as it comes in this situation, I think, and if you fancy yourselves, you fancy yourselves, and if you don't, you maybe try and engineer second place. I don't think we did, though, Dave. I think
no.
it was a lineup that had other intentions than just going out and winning the game at all costs, but I think the intention was to win it.
Yeah, we were just bad.
Yeah, we were. It didn't look like it wasn't a 100 miles an hour game. It wasn't a game that the two teams were desperate to come out with a positive result from. But I think Belgium's second string handled the situation rather better than England's. And had we got the result, and it could have gone either way, you know, that Januzaj goal doesn't go in and Rashford finishes his big chance. It's a totally different outcome from the same game. And it was a game for me, Dave, I don't know how you feel about it, that Belgium edged.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Belgium edged it really, for me, where they sort of lived or died was Moussa Dembele in midfield. If he was going to, you know, if Belgium were going to win that game, he was the one who was going to play well and gel things from front to back. And I thought he was outstanding. I mean, I'm continually impressed by Dembele every time I see him. And last night, where England had that gap between defence and midfield, and then an even further gap between the midfield and the attacking players, for Belgium, Dembele was in both of those gaps simultaneously, linking everything up, winning the ball, using it cleverly but really simply, just recycling it positively all the time. And it was a little bit of, you know, I hate to sort of phrase it like this, but I would hope Eric Dyer was watching his teammate there and getting a little bit of a masterclass in how to play that role, and how to do that job, because I thought he was just magnificent last night. And I think Belgium, we can sit here and debate whether they wanted to win the game or not, but they were definitely attacking at times with intent, whilst also being very conscious of not wanting to pick up any injuries, or it was a friendly essentially. And yeah, not only did they shade it, I think that they just quite simply played okay, whereas England could never really raise it above pretty bad. And I think that's what sort of has hurt us a little bit in terms of morale and momentum.
It was disconnected from England, wasn't it? You've hinted already at the reason why. It was just never managing to get that coherence between, the midfield and anyone, frankly. That was where we looked weakest. I think, Phil Jones isn't first choice for a reason. I think we saw those reasons. And I think Kieran Trippier we missed for obvious reasons as well. Almost inarguably at this point, England's best player in the competition so far. And absent was notable. I think Trent Alexander-Arnold did fine.
Yeah.
But I think Trippier is by far the better option for England at the moment. And it was a really good evening, Dave, I thought, for Jordan Henderson.
Yeah.
Because there was a little debate pre-World Cup, and we sort of touched on it briefly, although we were both on the side of Jordan Henderson starting, about whether Dyer would take his spot against Tunisia. And I think Dyer's performance against Belgium completely gives light to any possibility that was ever in the frame.
It was also a very good night for Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain.
A few of them have been lately, haven't they?
I think I don't really blame. I don't blame Dyer, because there were so many relationships on the pitch that you could see were completely undercooked and just either not fully formed or not formed at all. But what was sort of so criminally disappointing for me is that because there wasn't that link, because there was those huge spaces from defence to midfield to attack. For example, we had Vardy, who is very much our plan B, brilliant striker, being in great form. He'll have come off that pitch last night so depressed because he just never got a sniff. He never got... I mean, as close as he came was, I think, Rashford crossed it over to him at one point for a header. He was never really going to get much on.
Trent, that was.
Yeah, sorry, Trent. And it was just... You look at that and you think, well, from looking at our bench and thinking, well, for once we've actually got quite a position of strength here. It looks pretty good. You now wonder if one or two of those players are gonna be a bit down, if truth be told. I didn't think it was a great night for Loftus-Cheek, who was coming off the back of a couple of really interesting and impressive cameos. I didn't think it was a great night for Delph. Didn't think it was a great night for Dyer. I didn't think it was a great night for Stones either, before he went off at half-time, because without having that outlet sort of 10 yards away from him to be able to play it, he looked slightly bereft of confidence, and the really disappointing aspect of it for me, Chris, was second half, just after half-time. Harry Maguire twice stepping out of defence and hitting it long. Literally just punting it long in the vague direction of Rashford and Vardy, because that's everything England have done in major tournaments when we've been struggling to break down a side for the last 20 years. And we're supposed to be evolving and moving beyond that. And it's also the one thing that, regardless of the opposition, it's the one thing we haven't done at this World Cup at any point. And then, soon as we're 1-0 down to a side who are better than us, we resort to lumping it long. And it was just all a bit depressing.
Yeah, and I think it was a lack of an option from Dyer or Loftus-Cheek or Delph that really forced our hand defensively. I think we did it quite a lot, actually, in this game. And that link from Henderson and then the link from Lingard, I think are vital to our ability to play the other way, really.
Yeah, we missed Lingard so much last night.
Yeah, we did. And the only thing I'm really taking out of this game, because it wasn't our first choice team. It wasn't their first choice team. Neither of us really needed to win it. And it was played like a friendly. I have a concern about our second string now.
Yeah.
Because I think that a rather too large percentage of it didn't look up to scratch.
The point I made to somebody when I was in the public house last night, though, was that our second string did look weak last night, but ultimately this is the half of the squad that is under direct pressure from people like Foden, Sancho, etc., and their development. So in a way, I'm sort of not too worried about it, because I sort of think, well, longer term, that's absolutely fine, because you can see, anybody who's watched any England youth football over the last 3 years will see where the pressure is going to come for these players, and they're either going to have to step up to keep their place, or they won't be part of the system. But right here, right now, to quote Fatboy Slim, it suddenly makes our bench look a hell of a lot weaker going into the Colombia game. And we both talked before the World Cup that we actually thought we had a decent bench. For once, it was a position of strength to come from.
Yeah, we should say that's throwing all of them in at once, which is a pretty unnatural position to be in. So again, it's not really worth judging too many of them.
No.
To pick out a few though, Dave, are you of the mind that getting minutes into Danny Rose's legs was more important than him performing well?
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, I would agree with that. Because, I mean, it's clear with Rose, I think he's going to move this summer, by all accounts, and probably going to move to the northwest of England. And yeah, you could see that he is just really lacking match sharpness. He's the talent's still there and everything's still there, but he did look. I mean, the slightly worrying thing, Chris, was he looked right to the end of the game. To me, he looked slightly out of it. He still looked a way off to me.
Yeah, I think he played like a player who's not quite there yet. And I think I'm going for Ashley Young against Colombia, to be honest.
Yeah.
And Trippier comes back in very obviously on the other side, and then back to the same back three. So I don't think anybody in that back line has played themselves into contention, really. I think Gary Cahill was possibly the one who had the biggest opportunity alongside Rose to play his way into the starting lineup, and I just don't think any of them did enough to catch the eye, really.
No.
The one consistent name at the back is Jordan Pickford, who's taken a bit of a kick in for, I think primarily for the goal, but more accurately, in my book at least, as a non-goalkeeper, for this habit that has been unusually astutely identified by pundits of parrying the ball back into danger, which I must admit is something that hadn't really dawned on me about him, but is noticeable.
Yeah, well, the discussion we had before is what I stand by, really, is that I think Butland is the better goalkeeper, but the difference is with Pickford is that you make the compromise to have his distribution. The problem was last night is that in a game like that where England sit so deep and are forced so deep, and then their attacking players are so far beyond the midfield, you can't really use his distribution to any effect. You can't get him to spring anything or to pick anybody out when there's nobody there doing it and trying to run beyond. So, last night did expose some of those compromises you make, but for me, brackets Clive, I still think he should be in there, despite Butland being the slightly better keeper, because I think a goalkeeper is such a confidence position that if he's in there and if he's doing okay and if he's not making the sort of mistakes that are going to be replayed in every montage going forward, then I think you just keep him in there and you keep doing what he's doing. But there's been a bit of a weird debate today, hasn't there, Chris, about how people should analyse goalkeepers, and if you're not a goalkeeper, you don't know, you weren't there, man. But I don't really hold with that, because I think none of us really know the sort of technical intricacies of certain types of training for any position on the football pitch. But I think we know when somebody's doing something right and when they're doing something wrong. And I don't. What he's got, Chris, is he's got a sort of technical weakness, hasn't he? That's the thing, and they'll be working on it. But I think you've just got to look at what sort of outweighs it on the other side of his game. Would you bring Butland in?
No chance. No chance. I think if the parrying issue persists, and particularly if it costs us in this World Cup, then you might have a look around the time of the Nations League fixtures and maybe giving Butland a bit more of a run. But Pickford at the moment is so far off having done anything that justifies the weight of being dropped during a World Cup.
No. And the mistakes, if you're picking up, these are what, although it's quite a big technical area, these are what I would describe as the finer points of goalkeeping. So I think until you start making really basic errors, which is what has cost us in other World Cups, and is what has cost, let's be honest, has cost Joe Hart his place, I don't think you worry about it. I think you just crack on. But there's a couple of things I wanted to ask you, actually, Chris. What did you make of Rashford's performance?
Genuinely, my next question to you.
It's a roller coaster, wasn't it?
It was a bit. So we had the half chance that he didn't get any swerve on whatsoever that went well wide. That was a bit of a speculative effort, and then he had the 1-on-1 where he was played through and did everything right until the finish, I thought, and drew from Courtois the best non-save save I've seen for a while. He managed to touch that ball, Courtois. He definitely touched it, but he didn't change it at all. Not by a degree. And I think that goes in, and you're looking at an all-round good performance, a decent contribution from Rashford. I think we saw both sides of his game. I think we saw the guy who can really pick up the mood and drive at opposition and create things. And although he didn't do it, he looked the likeliest England player I thought to score. And we also saw the guy who's a bit wet behind the ears, probably not able to grab a game by the scruff of the neck and win it on his own. And that characteristic will come or it won't, but it's not going to be there at the age he's at now with the experience he's got now. And I think the Rashford versus Sterling debate for that position, I think, is less important than the idea that he probably needs Kane rather than Vardy if he's ever going to get close to fulfilling his potential in an England shirt in this situation. I don't think playing him off Vardy was anything like the best way to get the full rashers out of him, to be honest. But I don't think he necessarily let us down, but he didn't unseat Sterling for me.
No. I think I'm a massive Rashford fan. I think he's absolutely brilliant. I think he's the best young player we've got at the moment going forward. I really do.
100%.
But what he is he's a runner and a dribbler. He wants to take people on. He wants to get a defender isolated, and whether that's through the middle or out wide, that's where he's happiest. And to play him with Vardy, who needs the ball into his feet quickly as soon as he's got space, is just madness to me, for one, because they're just so opposite. You can't have a player who wants to run with the ball and take people on play with a striker who wants the ball as early as possible fed into him. So it was never really going to work as a two. But the thing is that Rashford can do things that there's only, ironically, there's only Sterling can do in that squad. So you have to go for one or the other. I don't think you can play both because they get into the same sort of spaces. But every time I see Rashford, I just feel like he's the one who can pull something out the blue. He feels more so than Sterling. Rashford at the moment is the one that you feel like could hit that ball from 30 yards that goes top corner, could cut in from the left or right, to be frank, and get that cross in that finds Kane. So last night I thought it was an okay performance. I thought it was a 6 out of 10 performance. He scores that goal and suddenly it's an 8 out of 10 performance. But you're exactly right. I think what it proved is that he just can't play with Vardy. And I don't think Sterling would have been able to play with Vardy either, because he's exactly the same sort of player. So I think, to go back to the point you were making about it was a good night for Henderson and a good night for Ox and everything, I think it was a good night for England's first 11, because I think it proved at the moment that team that me and you could probably pick right now for the Colombia game is pretty much set in stone going forward, barring injury, isn't it? And Rashford, as an option for half an hour off the bench to make a real impact, is good. The problem is, I think what last night proved is once you go beyond that, that's where we start to look a bit thin.
Yeah. Last one before we really get into the danger of doing what we said we weren't going to do. Alexander-Arnold went off with 10, 11 minutes to go, Dave. Danny Welbeck came on. Was that the right call? Well,
it's, firstly, it's not Danny Welbeck's fault he keeps getting picked for England. He is a really limited player. They've brought him on because they basically want everybody at this World Cup to get minutes on the pitch. Okay, I haven't got a real issue with that. But Harry Kane scored 5 in 2. He's absolutely chewing at the bit. We're 1-0 down. It's not working. The system isn't working. I would have given Harry a run at the end of the game. I really would. I would. If he comes on and he scores, then it changes the complete complexion for everyone, but it keeps him absolutely buzzing. And the thing about, our key players will have had 9 days rest and all this sort of thing, I don't really buy into it, Chris. It's a tournament football. The games come thick and fast. It's about keeping as many players in your squad at 80% as possible, not 100%, because it just doesn't matter. And I just think that you got a bloke here whose stated aim is to win the Golden Boot. Give him 10 minutes. Give him 10 minutes. But again, if we go and beat Colombia and Kane scores, 1, 2 or 3 goals, then Gareth Southgate is a genius, isn't
he? Yeah. I would have brought him on as well. I think it's that would have been what he wanted himself, I imagine. And I think it said everything about our actual intention to push for this, that he wasn't the player that was brought on. And I understand that. I think at that late stage behind, do you really go all out? Probably not. But Kane coming on and grabbing a goal, that could have been huge for him, for us, for the rest of the tournament. It's not to say necessarily would have done, because I don't think the England performance really warranted it, but it's just one of those little things that you keep an eye on, isn't it? And I think it was a very clear signifier that the desperation to win the group really wasn't there. And, maybe rightly, maybe wrongly, we will soon find out, because Belgium go into a round of 16 game against Japan on Monday in Rostov, and England play Colombia in Moscow on Tuesday. I'll have a quick run through the other round of 16 games as well, as it's vaguely interesting. Uruguay, Portugal, France, Argentina, Brazil, Mexico, Belgium, Japan, of course, Spain, Russia, Croatia, Denmark, Sweden, Switzerland, and Colombia, England. And that is Colombia and England's quarter-final opponent, Sweden or Switzerland. However you look at this, there is a good opportunity, and it's not about the weak side of the draw necessarily. There is a good opportunity for England to make their way into a World Cup semi-final here, Dave, because Colombia have played, for me, about half an hour's worth of football. Certainly not taking them for granted, but they're yet to really blow my skirt up. And Sweden and Switzerland, I think, are in England's league. So, certainly not punching up at them, are we? So,
no.
I think the opportunity is there, and yet 3 games in, fixtures known, all the way to the final at this point. We know who we can't get until when, and we know that Sweden and Switzerland are there if we can get through the next round. And yet we still don't really know what England are all about.
No.
Or at least we don't know how far that they can be taken by what they're about.
What's quite interesting with the Colombia game is we are, in a lot of ways, we are really evenly matched. There would certainly be no disgrace in going out to Colombia. But if we can get on the front foot, there is no doubting we can beat them. I sort of look at that, and then I look at Switzerland or Sweden, who Sweden will, if Sweden get through, all they will do is do what they did in the playoff to get there, which is they will just defend ridiculously deep and play for a penalty shootout from about the 15th minute in. If Switzerland are there, Switzerland are a very good side on paper, but they have a lot of players who are sort of bang out of form, and they're quite gettable at. But Colombia are a big hurdle first up, and I would have, if you'd have given me a choice either side of the draw, then I would have genuinely tossed a coin, because you can sit there and say, oh, well, it's Brazil in the quarterfinals, but England would beat Japan. I'll tell you that, yes, unequivocally. And I say that as somebody who has watched a bit of Japan over the last couple of years as well, and who knows their preparation for this World Cup was an absolute bin fire as well. It's incredible what they've achieved since they've been here, but England would beat them. And then if we go into a quarter-final with Brazil, who haven't really hit their groove yet, but are starting to get there, who knows? Whereas now, I think, because of the way he's played the last game and because of the changes he's made, the pressure's massively on for Colombia in a way that I don't think it would have been if he'd have just made the 3 or 4 changes, and we'd have at least got some rhythm going at some point in that game. And then, if we get through that game, you can't, it's another game where you can't make any assumptions, and the pressure's on, and the tabloid newspapers will be talking about the semi-final already, and it brings a horrific amount of pressure. So I just don't know how it's going to go. Is my honest take on it. I obviously hope we do make a semi-final. I obviously hope he's proved right and we batter Colombia and everything is right with the world. But I tell you what, if we don't put a performance together and we go out to Colombia in that round of 16, then suddenly what started as an incredibly promising World Cup suddenly feels very much like the same old England. So it's a real, it's one or the other, Chris, isn't it? This is the problem. It's hero or zero from here.
It is really. It takes on a whole different complexion, doesn't it? Because all of a sudden, it wasn't just the results in the first 2 games. It was the vibe. And when you get to a World Cup where you've won the first 2, then lost, and you're at home, very, very different. And that's not necessarily so much about the decisions that were made about the Belgium game, so much as win-win, loss-loss, in the minds of most normal football supporters, is loss-loss.
Yeah.
Because that's just the way we work, particularly as England supporters. And I think we're going to be in a position, if we do go out to Colombia, where we need to be very careful not to throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah.
Because there is going to be a lot of backlash if we do.
Yep, I completely agree with that. And it's just frustrating, Chris, because this is a situation that unfortunately we've manufactured for ourselves again. There are no external factors involved. This is the pressure cooker situation that Southgate has jumped into head first. So we will see. Yeah. Who knows?
Well, maybe he knows what he's doing. We'll find out on Tuesday. Right, we'll leave it there because, effectively the Belgian game tells us very, very little, and nothing of what it tells us is particularly enjoyable. So we're going to move straight on to Colombia. You can now follow us on Twitter. We are England Podcast because Stiles Council is apparently too long, hilariously. But England Podcast is free. Hooray! So we've got that, and that makes us, I think, the official one. I think that makes us official.
Absolutely.
That's how it works, isn't it?
I do hope you're listening, FA, particularly in the ticketing office.
We'll sell it for a price. I'm Chris M. Nee on Twitter as well. David's at David Hartrick, and you can follow all the Sphinx football stuff at Sphinx FTBL all over the damn place. We'll be back either way after Colombia. Have a lovely weekend. Enjoy the football. See you later.
See you there.